Welcome to Marple Whispers, where silence screams with hidden crimes. I'm Sean, and together we'll peel back the velvet curtain of polite society to reveal the treachery beneath. Trust no one. Question everything. The killer is closer than you think. In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, a glamorous actress named Lavinia West takes center stage in an amateur play, The Velvet Shadow, behind those ominous crimson curtains. But when the scripted murder turns deadly, Lavinia stabbed with a poisoned dagger during a blackout, the spotlight shifts to foul play. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unraveling a web of jealousy, betrayal, and hidden affairs among the cast. Her scheming husband Reginald, resentful niece Eliza, ambitious actor Timothy, loyal secretary Vera, and shady producer Victor. Clues like a twisted locket, a green ribbon, and candle wax lead to a shocking confession. Love and greed twisted into murder. Who pulled the strings? Dive into this Agatha Christie-inspired thriller where secrets lurk behind every fold and justice draws the final curtain. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Invitation. The village of St. Mary Mead lay hushed under the golden haze of an early autumn afternoon, its thatched cottages and winding lanes exuding that deceptive tranquility which so often masked the undercurrents of human drama. In the heart of this idyll stood the cottage of Miss Jane Marple, a sprightly lady of advanced years whose unassuming demeanour belied a mind as sharp as a needle's point. She sat in her small drawing-room, the air scented with the faint aroma of lavender from sachets tucked into the drawers of her Sheraton bureau. Her knitting lay in her lap, a half-finished woolen shawl destined for some deserving soul at the vicarage. But her hands were momentarily idle as she gazed out the window at the leaves drifting lazily from the old sycamore tree. Miss Marple's thoughts wandered to the recent village fete, where Mrs. Price had outdone herself with her famous seed cake, only for young Mr. Hodges to complain of a most peculiar indigestion that turned out to be nothing more than an overindulgence in gooseberries. Human nature, she murmured to herself, is ever the same, full of little secrets that swell into great troubles if not nipped in time. She picked up her needles again, the rhythmic click-click resuming like the ticking of a grandfather clock, when a sudden commotion at the garden gate shattered the peace. The gate creaked open with undue vigour, and in bustled Mrs. Dolphus Bantry, Dolly to her intimates, her ample figure swathed in a tweed coat that strained at the seams, her round face flushed not from exertion alone, but from the excitement of some fresh piece of news. Dolly was the Colonel's wife, a woman of generous spirit and even more generous gossip, whose visits invariably brought a whirlwind into Miss Marple's serene domain. "Jane, my dear Jane," Dolly exclaimed, barely pausing to close the gate behind her before hurrying up the path. She burst through the front door, left ajar, as was the custom in St. Mary Mead, and into the drawing-room, where she collapsed into the chintz-covered armchair opposite Miss Marple, fanning herself with a crumpled envelope. "You'll never guess what Arthur's gone and done now. Patronising the arts, if you please, and of all people, involving that dreadful Lavinia West." Miss Marple's blue eyes, magnified slightly behind her rimless spectacles, lifted with mild interest. She set her knitting aside on the occasional table, beside a vase of late-blooming Michaelmas daisies. "Lavinia West, the actress, do you mean? The one who caused such a stir back in the 20s with her divorce from that banker fellow. I thought she'd retired to Danemouth years ago, living quietly on her settlements." "Quietly? Ha ha! Dolly snorted, her laughter a hearty trill that set the teacups on the sideboard rattling. Quiet as a fox in a henhouse, more like. No, Jane, she's back with a vengeance. Fancies herself a director now, and she's roped into poor Arthur to host this amateur theatrical nonsense at Gossington Hall. It's all for the Village Hall Fund, mind you, but mark my words, it's Lavinia's bid for glory. The play's called The Velvet Shadow. Some melodramatic rot about intrigue and murder behind the curtains. And she's starring in it, of course, as the tragic diva. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her expression one of polite curiosity, though a flicker of deeper intrigue stirred within her. She had long observed how the stage, with its painted illusions and scripted passions, so often echoed the real deceptions of everyday life. How very enterprising! And Sir Henry Clithering is allowing this at his estate? He must be in a charitable mood indeed. Charitable or bewitched, I can't say, Dolly replied, extracting a gilt-edged invitation from her envelope and thrusting it toward Miss Marple. The card bore an ornate script. You are cordially invited to the premiere performance of The Velvet Shadow, under the patronage of Sir Henry Clithering, Esq., at Gossington Manor. A night of mystery and suspense awaits behind the velvet curtains. Tomorrow evening, sharp at 7. Arthur's dragging me along, and I simply won't go without you, Jane. It'll be a lark, or a disaster. Lavinia's assembled a motley crew. That solicitor's boy, Timothy Hale, playing the dashing rogue. Her own niece, Eliza Croft, as the simpering understudy, and her husband, Reginald, the one half her age, who's supposed to be the butler, but looks more like a lounge lizard. Oh, and there's talk of a London producer slithering about, sniffing for talent or trouble. Miss Marple took the invitation, her fingers tracing the embossed edges, as if reading the hidden motives therein. She recalled a similar affair in Danemouth, where an amateur production had unravelled into scandal over a missing necklace, much like the village charade that ended with old Mr. Badger's untimely demise, pinned on the wrong parlour-maid. It does sound diverting, Dolly. One meets such interesting types at these gatherings, people who say one thing and mean quite another. Very well, I shall accompany you. A change of scene might do me good. Dolly clapped her hands in delight, rising with renewed energy. Splendid! Wear your best brooch, the cane one with the pearls. And mind you, keep your eyes peeled. Lavinia's not one to share the spotlight without a fight. As Dolly bustled out, promising to send the car round at 6, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, but her mind was no longer on the wool. The velvet curtains of the invitation evoked images of shadowed wings and whispered plots, much like the drawn drapes in Mrs. Symington's parlour during that Little Furs affair. Little did she suspect that tomorrow's performance would draw back not just stage curtains, but the veil on a far deadlier drama, one where the killer lurked not in script, but in flesh and blood. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, and Miss Marple smiled faintly to herself. In St. Mary Mead, invitations were rarely as innocent as they seemed. Chapter 2. The stage is set, the grand ballroom of Gossington Hall, with its high ceilings and crystal chandeliers that had witnessed countless balls and banquets in bygone eras, had undergone a remarkable transformation. What was once a space of polished parquet floors and gilded mirrors now resembled a provincial theatre, complete with rows of mismatched chairs scavenged from the village hall and neighbouring estates. At the far end, a makeshift stage had been erected, its platform creaking under the weight of hastily constructed scenery. towering flats painted to mimic a Gothic drawing room, complete with faux marble columns and brooding portraits that seemed to follow one with accusatory eyes. Dominating it all were the velvet curtains, sumptuous folds of deep burgundy, salvaged from some forgotten London production, their heavy drapes promising to conceal secrets both scripted and unforeseen. Miss Jane Marple, escorted by Dolly Bantry, navigated the throng of arriving guests with her characteristic poise. Her small black handbag clutched firmly in one gloved hand. The air hummed with anticipation, laced with the scents of mothballs from old evening gowns, and the faint tang of grease paint wafting from backstage. "Quite the turnout," Miss Marple observed mildly, her voice barely audible over the chatter. Dolly nodded vigorously, her pearl necklace bobbing. "Everyone's here. Curiosity, mostly. Lavinia West hasn't set foot in St. Mary Mead since that scandalous elopement of hers 20 years back. They say she's poured her own money into this folly, though heaven knows why." As they claimed seats in the third row, close enough for observation without ostentation, Miss Marple's keen gaze swept the room. Sir Henry Clithering bustled about like a genial ringmaster, directing latecomers and exchanging hearty slaps on the back with Colonel Arthur Bantry, who looked faintly bemused in his tweed suit. To their left sat Dr. Haydock, the village physician, his ruddy face creased in good humour as he conversed with Mrs. Price, the postmistress whose talent for disseminating news rivaled the telegraph. "Mark my words," Mrs. Price was saying in a stage whisper that carried, "Lavinia's up to something. That husband of hers, Reginald, eyes like a ferret, always darting about, and her niece, poor Eliza, trailing after like a lost lamb." Miss Marple inclined her head, committing the remark to memory. Human frailties, she knew, often revealed themselves in such unguarded moments, much like the time in the vicarage when a casual comment about a missing brooch had unravelled a web of deceit. Her attention shifted to the front, where a sleek gentleman in a tailored suit lounged against a pillar, his dark hair pomaded to perfection, and a cigarette holder dangling from manicured fingers. Victor Lang, the London producer Dolly had mentioned, his smile was too polished, his eyes too appraising, as if assessing not just the actors, but the very souls in the room. A hush fell as the house lights dimmed, prompted by a young stagehand dimming the chandeliers with a long pole. From behind the velvet curtains came muffled voices. A final flurry of preparation. Then, with a dramatic flourish, the drapes parted, revealing Lavinia West in all her glory. She stood centre stage, a vision in a flowing gown of emerald silk that caught the footlights, her raven hair piled high, and her posture commanding the space like a queen surveying her court. At 50-odd, she retained the allure that had once captivated West End audiences, her voice resonating with trained timbre as she launched into the opening monologue. "My lords and ladies," Lavinia intoned, her words dripping with feigned aristocracy, "welcome to the shadowed halls of Ravenscroft Manor, where secrets lurk in every whisper and betrayal hides behind every smile." The plot unfolded swiftly, a tale of inheritance and intrigue, with Lavinia as Lady Eleanora, the imperious widow entangled in a web of suitors and schemers. Young Timothy Hale entered as the villainous Count Vittorio, his handsome features twisted into a sneer, though Miss Marple noted the tremor in his hands, a sign of nerves, or perhaps something deeper. Timothy, the solicitor's son with dreams of the silver screen, delivered his lines with youthful vigour, but his glances toward Lavinia held a mix of admiration and resentment. Enter Eliza Croft, Lavinia's niece and understudy, in the role of the faithful maid. Mousy indeed, with her pale complexion and downcast eyes, she fluttered about the set, twisting a prop handkerchief in a manner that seemed less acting than habit. "Yes, m'lady," Eliza murmured, her voice barely carrying. "The guests arrive anon." Miss Marple's brow furrowed slightly. The girl's deference masked a simmering undercurrent, reminiscent of the parlour-maid in that Bermondsey affair, who had harboured grudges for years. Reginald West, Lavinia's husband, a man in his 30s with the dissipated charm of one who lived on borrowed glamour, appeared as the scheming steward. His tie was impeccably knotted, but his eyes betrayed a glaze that spoke of pre-performance fortification from the manor's cellars. "The will, madam," he drawled, handing Lavinia a rolled parchment, "holds surprises for us all." A ripple of laughter from the audience, but Miss Marple caught the fleeting glare Lavinia shot him. Marital discord, perhaps, or a scripted tension bleeding into reality. Assisting from the wings was Vera Stanton, Lavinia's efficient secretary, a woman of indeterminate age with a clipboard clutched like a shield. She darted in during a brief blackout to adjust a prop candelabra, her movements precise and unobtrusive. Victor Lang, seated nearby, leaned forward during these moments, his expression one of predatory interest, as if scouting for untapped potential amid the amateur chaos. The first act built to a crescendo. Accusations flew, alliances shifted, and Lady Eleanora uncovered a forged letter implicating the Count. Timothy's character lunged with a prop dagger, blunt-tipped, Miss Marple noted, only for Lavinia to disarm him with theatrical flair. The curtains swished closed amid polite applause, the velvet folds whispering as they met. Interval lights flickered on, and the audience stirred, voices rising in a babel of commentary. Dolly turned to Miss Marple, her eyes sparkling. "Well, Lavinia's still got it, hasn't she? Though that Timothy boy acts like he's got ants in his trousers." Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. "Indeed, Dolly. But observe how the players interact off-script. See there, Reginald slipping backstage with a flask, and Eliza hovering like a shadow, and Mr. Lang." He passed a note to Vera during the blackout. "Business, no doubt, but one wonders." Rising for a stretch, Miss Marple wandered toward the refreshment table, where Dr. Haydock poured sherry with a steady hand. "Enjoying the show, Miss Marple?" he asked, his medical eye appraising her vitality. "Tolerably," she replied, "though the themes, betrayal, hidden motives, remind me of real life. You knew Lavinia in her Danemouth days, didn't you? Any old ailments I should know about?" Haydock chuckled. "Fit as a fiddle, last I checked. Though she does take digitalis for her heart, nothing serious." Mrs. Price, eavesdropping shamelessly, chimed in. "Heart? More like a heart of stone. I heard she cut off her brother's family years ago. Greed, pure and simple. And that Victor Lang? Shady type? Rumours of blackmail in theatrical circles." Colonel Melchett, the chief constable, joined them, his military bearing stiff. "Amusing diversion," he grunted. "But amateur stuff. Too many loose ends in the plot." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Loose ends indeed. She had spotted a real dagger among the props earlier, glinting under the stage lights before being whisked away. And that scrap of paper Victor had passed, could it be a threat or an offer? As the bell rang for the second act, the crowd resettled. The curtains parted once more, revealing Lavinia in a new costume, her face powdered to ghostly pallor. The drama intensified, revelations of illicit affairs, a poisoned chalice narrowly avoided, and mounting suspicions among the characters. Timothy's count grew more menacing, his soliloquy on vengeance delivered with surprising conviction. Eliza's maid uncovered a hidden compartment in the set's desk, producing a vial labelled poison. The audience gasped as Lavinia feigned sipping from it, only to recoil in mock horror. Yet Miss Marple's attention wandered to the peripheries. Reginald, offstage but visible in the wings, exchanged a heated whisper with Eliza, their heads close. Vera Stanton consulted her watch repeatedly, as if timing something beyond the cues. And Victor Lang? He slipped out during a scene change, returning moments later with a satisfied smirk. The act hurtled toward its climax. Lady Eleanora confronting the Count behind the velvet curtains, a struggle ensuing in silhouette. Lavinia's cry rang out, piercing and authentic. The drapes closed with a final swish, promising the denouement after another brief pause. But as the lights rose, Miss Marple felt a prickling at the nape of her neck. That indefinable sense of impending discord, like the calm before a village storm. Little did the assembly know that the real tragedy was mere minutes from unfolding, transforming their evening of make-believe into a tableau of terror. The velvet curtains, so elegant and opaque, held more than shadows. They cradled the seeds of murder, waiting to be drawn aside. Chapter 3. A Curtain Falls. The interval at Gossington Hall passed in a flurry of animated whispers and clinking glasses, the ballroom alive with the sort of subdued excitement that follows a promising first act. Guests mingled under the chandeliers, their faces flushed from the warmth of the room and the intrigue of the stage. Miss Jane Marple, ever the observer, lingered near the refreshment table, her small frame unobtrusive amid the taller figures. She sipped her lemonade slowly, her ears attuned to the fragments of conversation that drifted like autumn leaves. "Did you see Lavinia's expression when Timothy brandished that dagger?" Mrs. Price confided to a cluster of villagers, her voice laced with relish. "Pure venom, if looks could kill." Dr. Haydock, standing nearby, chuckled indulgently. "Theatre's all smoke and mirrors, my dear. Though Lavinia does play the part to the hilt, reminds me of her heyday in the Scarlet Veil. Heart like iron, that one." Miss Marple noted the doctor's casual mention of Lavinia's constitution. It aligned with his earlier remark about her medication, a detail that might prove trivial or pivotal. Dolly Bantry swept up, linking arms with Miss Marple. "What do you make of it so far, Jane?" That Victor Lang slunk off during the break, probably plotting Lavinia's triumphant return to the West End. And Reginald? I saw him downing a brandy like it was water. Marriage to a diva must be exhausting. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Exhausting indeed. But observe Eliza. She's been fidgeting with that locket all evening. A nervous habit, or perhaps a token of some deeper attachment." The bell tinkled, summoning the audience back to their seats. The lights dimmed once more, casting elongated shadows across the rows. Expectant hush descended, broken only by the rustle of programs and the occasional cough. From behind the velvet curtains came the faint sounds of final adjustments. A prop shifted, a whispered cue. Then, with a majestic sweep, the drapes parted, revealing the set bathed in a moody amber glow. The second act commenced. Lavinia West re-emerged as Lady Eleanora, now clad in a sombre black velvet gown that accentuated her dramatic pallor. Her monologue opened the scene, a soliloquy on betrayal that resonated through the ballroom. "In the folds of night, where trust dissolves like mist, I see the hand that wields the fatal stroke," she declaimed, her voice a velvet blade cutting through the air. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Timothy Hale as the Count stalked onto the stage, his cape swirling like a storm cloud. Their exchange crackled with tension, a verbal duel of accusations and denials laced with hints of forbidden passion. Miss Marple watched intently, her knitting forgotten in her lap. She noted how Lavinia's gestures grew more emphatic, her eyes flashing with what seemed genuine fire. Was it method acting, or a spillover from real grievances? Reginald entered briefly as the steward, delivering a cryptic message about a hidden will, his delivery slurred just enough to draw titters from the crowd. Eliza, as the maid, hovered in the background, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed on Lavinia with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The plot thickened. A clandestine meeting in the Manor's shadowed alcove where Lady Eleanora confronted her rivals. Vera Stanton, visible in the wings, signalled cues with a flashlight, her face a mask of concentration. Victor Lang, seated 2 rows ahead, scribbled notes furiously, his pen scratching like a conspirator's quill. A sudden blackout plunged the stage into darkness, heightening the suspense, a theatrical trick to simulate a storm. When the lights flickered back, Lavinia stood alone, clutching a letter that revealed the Count's treachery. The climax approached with inexorable pace. Timothy advanced, his character unmasked as the plotter. "Your empire crumbles, Eleanora," he snarled, drawing the prop dagger from his belt. Lavinia recoiled, her hand to her breast. "Traitor! But I shall not fall without unmasking you." They grappled in choreographed fury, silhouettes dancing against the backdrop. Then, as scripted, Lavinia twisted away, only for Timothy to lunge again. She staggered behind the velvet curtains, her cry echoing, a piercing wail that sent shivers through the assembly. The curtains swished closed for the scene transition, muffling the thud of her fall. Applause erupted tentatively, mingled with murmurs of approval. But as seconds stretched, an unease rippled through the room. The drapes should have reopened by now, revealing the denouement. Instead, silence reigned, broken by a muffled exclamation from backstage. Timothy's voice carried faintly. "Lavinia! Get up! It's time for the bow! Lavinia!" The audience stirred, whispers swelling to a buzz. Sir Henry Clithering rose from his front row seat, his face creased with concern. "Something's amiss," he muttered, striding toward the stage. Dr. Haydock followed, his medical bag instinctively in hand. Miss Marple remained seated, her eyes narrowed, absorbing every detail. The way Vera Stanton darted from the wings, her clipboard abandoned, Eliza's frozen stance at the edge of the platform, Reginald's belated emergence, his glass shattered on the floor. Sir Henry parted the curtains with a firm tug, revealing the tableau within. Lavinia lay crumpled on the boards, her black gown pooled like ink, a dark stain spreading across her bodice. Timothy knelt beside her, his hands hovering helplessly. "She's not moving! Good God, that's blood!" The gasp from the audience was collective, a wave of horror crashing over the room. Dr. Haydock knelt swiftly, his fingers probing for a pulse. His expression hardened. "She's dead, stabbed through the heart, and this isn't the prop. This is real steel." Chaos erupted. Women shrieked, men shouted for order. Colonel Melchett, ever the authority, barked commands. "No one leave the premises! Seal the doors! This is a crime scene!" Miss Marple rose quietly, her mind racing like a well-oiled mechanism. The dagger, Eliza had mentioned it missing earlier, a detail now looming large. And the blackout, perfect cover for a switch. She edged closer as Inspector Slack arrived on the scene, summoned from the village station with uncanny speed. Slack, a brusque man with a perpetual scowl, took charge, his notebook flipping open. "Statements from the cast first. Who was backstage during the struggle?" Timothy stammered, his face ashen. "We all were, in positions, but the curtains hid everything. I thought she was acting." Eliza collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "The dagger. I checked it before the act. It was blunt." Reginald paced, his hands trembling. "My wife. Who would do this? We had our differences, but murder." Vera Stanton, composed amid the turmoil, offered, "I saw no one unusual." But Victor Lang, he was in the audience, yet he vanished briefly. Victor, cornered by Slack, protested smoothly. "Merely a call of nature. Inspector. I adored Lavinia. Why harm her?" As the police herded suspects into the adjacent library, Miss Marple lingered near the stage, her gaze tracing the velvet curtain's hems. A faint smudge of grease paint on the fabric, a misplaced hairpin glinting under the lights. "Curious," she murmured to Dolly, who hovered anxiously. The play mirrored life too closely, betrayal behind curtains. But who pulled the strings? The night wore on. The manor transformed from festive venue to sombre fortress. Guests were questioned in turn. Alibis probed. Dr. Haydock confirmed the wound's lethality. A single thrust, precise and fatal, interacting perhaps with her heart condition. Miss Marple, dismissed as a harmless spinster, eavesdropped shamelessly. Mrs. Price confided a rumour of Lavinia's will, favouring Reginald unless infidelity surfaced. Colonel Melchett grumbled about motives, jealousy from Eliza, debts for Timothy, old grudges for Victor. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts circled the unseen. The rustle during the blackout, the note Victor had passed earlier. Human nature, she reflected, thrived in shadows, much like the poison ivy in her garden that choked the unwary. As dawn tinged the horizon, the inspector declared the manor secure, but the killer remained at large, hidden like a flaw in the script. The velvet curtains hung limp now, their secrets spilled, but Miss Marple knew the real unravelling had just begun. In St. Mary Mead, curtains fell, but truths rose inexorably, drawn by the gentle tug of observation. Chapter 4. Shadows of Suspicion. The morning after Lavinia West's shocking murder cast a pall over Gossington Hall, its grandeur dimmed by the weight of tragedy. The autumn sun struggled through heavy clouds, bathing the manor's stone facade in a muted glow, as if nature itself mourned the loss of the erstwhile star. Inside, the atmosphere was taut. The once festive ballroom, now a grim stage for Inspector Slack's investigation. Policemen tramped through the corridors, their boots echoing on polished floors, while the suspects, sequestered in the library, awaited their turn under the inspector's relentless scrutiny. Miss Jane Marple, unobtrusive as ever, sat in a corner of the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly, a deceptive picture of serenity amid the storm. Dolly Bantry, perched on a velvet settee, fidgeted with her gloves. "It's ghastly, Jane," she whispered, her voice low to avoid the ears of Mrs. Price, who hovered nearby, eager to glean fresh gossip. "Lavinia, stabbed right under our noses. And that dagger, how did it get there? I swear I saw it in the prop box earlier, all blunt and harmless." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, flickered with interest. "Did you, Dolly? That's most illuminating." A prop replaced at the critical moment suggests premeditation and access. Her mind darted to the village flower show years ago, where a swapped label on a prize marrow had exposed a deeper plot. The library doors swung open, and Inspector Slack emerged, his face etched with the impatience of a man who loathed mysteries that resisted quick resolution. He carried a notebook bristling with scribbled facts, his pencil poised like a weapon. "Miss Marple," he said brusquely, spotting her. "I suppose you've some theory already, meddling as usual?" His tone was gruff, but she detected a grudging respect. Their paths had crossed before, after all, in the affair of the poisoned tea cake. "I merely observe, Inspector," she replied mildly, her needles pausing. "The truth often lies in what people overlook, like the shadow cast by a candle, unnoticed until it shifts." Slack snorted but moved on, summoning Reginald West for another round of questions. Miss Marple watched as the widower shuffled forward, his handsome face haggard, his once jaunty tie now a crumpled afterthought. In the library, Reginald slumped into a leather chair, his hands clasped tightly. "Lavinia and I were devoted," he insisted, though his voice wavered. "Yes, we quarrelled. Money, mostly. She held the purse strings tight, her earnings from the stage days. But murder? I was in the audience, Inspector, clear as day." Slack's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Mr. West, a stage hand saw you near the prop table before the second act. Care to explain?" Reginald flushed. "I was checking the set. Lavinia asked me to ensure everything was in order. She was particular about details." Miss Marple, lingering just outside the open door, noted the defensive edge in his tone, reminiscent of young Mr. Carter's excuses during the church fund scandal. Next came Eliza Croft, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her locket clutched like a talisman. "Aunt Lavinia was everything to me," she said, her voice trembling. "She promised me a role next season, but she always took the lead. I handled the props, yes. I noticed the dagger missing at interval, but I thought it misplaced. I'd never hurt her." Her words spilled too quickly, Miss Marple thought, like a rehearsed script delivered under duress. Timothy Hale followed, his boyish charm replaced by a nervous tick in his jaw. "Lavinia said I lacked polish," he admitted, shifting in his seat. "We argued in rehearsal. She threatened to cut my part. But I was on stage during the blackout, Inspector, playing my role to the hilt." His defiance rang hollow, and Miss Marple recalled a similar bravado from a gardener caught pilfering roses, his guilt betrayed by overemphasis. Vera Stanton, the efficient secretary, maintained her composure, her dark hair pulled back severely. "My job was to keep the production running smoothly," she said crisply. "Lavinia had enemies, old theatrical rivals perhaps. That producer, Victor Lang, was pressing her to return to London, but she refused. I saw him loitering near the stage door earlier." Her tone was measured, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease, like a villager concealing a half-truth about a neighbour's indiscretion. Victor Lang, when called, exuded urban polish, his cigarette holder a prop in itself. "Lavinia and I go back years," he drawled, leaning back with calculated ease. "She owed me for past favours, a contract I helped her secure. I was in the audience, charming potential investors. Kill her? Preposterous! I needed her alive for my next venture." His smile was too smooth, Miss Marple noted, like the travelling salesman who'd swindled half the parish with faulty tonics. As the interrogations continued, Miss Marple slipped away to the garden, where the morning mist clung to the box hedges. She examined the stage door, its latch worn and easily jimmied. A scuff mark in the damp earth suggested a hurried exit or entry. Nearby, a shred of green ribbon, like one from Eliza's costume, caught on a rose thorn. "Careless," Miss Marple murmured, tucking it into her handbag. She recalled a similar clue, a torn cufflink that had unravelled the mystery of the vicar's missing arms. Back inside, she joined Dolly for tea in the drawing room, where Sir Henry Clithering held court, his joviality strained. "Dreadful business," he said, pouring a cup. "Lavinia was a force, but she trod on toes. I heard rumours she was revising her will, cutting out that niece of hers." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. "Indeed, that would explain certain tensions. Wills, Sir Henry, are like kindling, spark enough to ignite old grudges." Dr. Haydock approached, his medical bag slung over his shoulder. "I've spoken with the coroner," he confided. "The dagger was laced with a digitalis derivative, likely from Lavinia's own heart medication. Whoever used it knew her weakness." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "A personal touch, then. Someone close enough to know her habits." The afternoon brought a new development. A stagehand reported seeing a cloaked figure slip behind the curtains just before the blackout. Colonel Melchett, assisting Slack, dismissed it as theatrical nerves, but Miss Marple pondered the timing. The blackout had lasted mere seconds, enough for a practiced hand to act. She recalled the village fete, where a fleeting distraction had allowed a thief to swap a prize ribbon. As evening fell, a note arrived for Miss Marple, slipped under her teacup by an unseen hand. Scrawled in hasty ink it read, "Meet me in the garden at dusk. I saw something about the dagger." No signature, but the handwriting was neat, feminine. Vera, perhaps? Or a trap? Miss Marple tucked the note away, her pulse quickening. She knew from experience, think of the poisoned letter in the Chipping Cleghorn case, that such missives often led to revelations or danger. At dusk, she ventured to the garden, her shawl drawn tight against the chill. The rose beds lay in shadow, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Footsteps crunched on gravel, and Vera Stanton emerged, her face pale. "Miss Marple, I couldn't tell Slack, not yet. I saw Victor near the prop table during interval, handling something metallic. He and Lavinia had a past, debts, secrets. I think she was holding something over him." Miss Marple's eyes softened, probing. "And you, Miss Stanton? What hold did Lavinia have over you?" Vera stiffened, her lips parting, but no answer came. A rustle in the bushes cut their talk short. Someone watching. Vera fled, leaving Miss Marple alone with her thoughts. Another figure cloaked in the gloom had been listening, Timothy perhaps, or Reginald. Back in the manor, whispers of motive swirled. Eliza's resentment, Reginald's financial dependence, Timothy's ambition, Victor's shady dealings. The velvet curtains, now drawn tight, seemed to mock the investigation, hiding truths as effectively as they had concealed the killer. Miss Marple settled into her chair, her mind weaving connections. Shadows of suspicion lengthened, but the truth, she knew, lay in the smallest details. A ribbon, a note, a glance too fleeting to notice. In St. Mary Mead, the darkest secrets always surfaced, like ripples in a still pond, disturbed by a single stone. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Dark. The night settled over Gossington Hall like a heavy velvet drape, its silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the occasional creak of the manor's ancient timbers. The investigation into Lavinia West's murder had turned the once vibrant estate into a labyrinth of suspicion, each corridor and shadowed corner holding the promise of secrets yet to be unveiled. Miss Jane Marple, her slight figure wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill, sat alone in her guest room, her knitting untouched on the bedside table. The day's revelations, Reginald's evasions, Eliza's tears, Timothy's defensiveness, Vera's guarded hints, and Victor's slick denials swirled in her mind like leaves in a November gust. But it was the anonymous note slipped under her teacup that afternoon that now held her attention. Meet me in the theatre at midnight. I know who did it." The handwriting, sharp and precise, suggested urgency, perhaps fear. She resolved to keep the rendezvous, for in her experience, reminiscent of the cryptic message in the Danemouth poisoning case, such summons often led to the heart of the matter. As the manor's clocks chimed the hour, Miss Marple slipped silently down the staircase, her sensible shoes whispering on the carpet. The ballroom, now a sombre stage for tragedy, lay in near darkness, the chandeliers dimmed to a faint glow. The velvet curtains loomed at the far end, their burgundy folds absorbing the light like a confession withheld. She paused by the stage, her eyes adjusting to the gloom, and noted a faint draught stirring the drapes, a sign, perhaps, of an open window or an unseen presence. "Human nature," she murmured, "is never so bold as when it thinks itself unseen." A soft footfall broke her reverie. From the shadows emerged Vera Stanton, her clipboard absent, her face pale under the scant moonlight filtering through a high window. "Miss Marple," she whispered, her voice taut as a violin string. "I had to speak privately. The police, Inspector Slack, he's barking up the wrong tree, focusing on Reginald. It's Victor Lang you should watch. I saw him during the interval, near the prop table, handling a blade. Lavinia was blackmailing him, something about a forged contract from her London days. He stood to lose everything if she exposed him." Miss Marple's gaze softened, probing. "A serious accusation, Miss Stanton. Blackmail is a dangerous game, but so is secrecy. What hold did Lavinia have over you? A loyal secretary knows more than she tells." Vera's lips parted, a protest forming, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Before she could answer, a creak from the wings startled them both. Vera froze, then bolted toward the stage door, her footsteps echoing into silence. Miss Marple stood still, her heart steady despite the tension. Another sound, a rustle like fabric brushing wood, came from behind the curtains. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice calm but firm. Timothy Hale stepped into view, his face flushed, his tie askew. "Miss Marple, I couldn't sleep. I overheard Vera just now, and she's wrong about Victor. It was Reginald I saw with the dagger before the second act, polishing it backstage. He despised Lavinia's control, her money, her fame. He told me once he'd do anything to be free." His words tumbled out, too eager, Miss Marple thought, like the village lad who'd confessed to stealing apples to deflect from a greater crime. "Interesting, Mr. Hale," she replied, her tone mild but her mind racing. "Yet you argued with Lavinia yourself, did you not? Over your role, your future." Timothy blanched, stammering, "That was nothing, stage nerves." He retreated, leaving Miss Marple alone with the curtains, their stillness now ominous. She recalled a similar midnight encounter in St. Mary Mead, when a whispered confession in the churchyard had cracked open a case of embezzlement. Returning to her room, she pondered the threads weaving together. Vera's accusation, Timothy's deflection, the poisoned dagger, and the blackout's perfect timing. Morning brought fresh developments. At breakfast, served in the Manor's oak-panelled dining room, Sir Henry Clithering shared news from the coroner, relayed by Dr. Haydock. The poison on the blade was indeed digitalis, Sir Henry said, buttering his toast. Mixed with Lavinia's medication, it ensured death even from a shallow wound. Whoever did this knew her medical history intimately. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, gasped. "That points to someone close, Reginald, or even Eliza." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts elsewhere. "Or someone with access to her belongings," she said quietly. A secretary, perhaps, or a niece handling props. Her mind flitted to the green ribbon she'd found by the stage door, its hue matching Eliza's costume. She resolved to visit the girl, who had been sequestered in a guest room under police watch. Eliza Croft sat by a window, her locket dangling as she twisted it nervously. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice brittle, "I know how it looks, me handling the props, the missing dagger. But I loved Aunt Lavinia, even if she was cruel sometimes." Her eyes welled up. "I found a letter in her dressing room yesterday, hidden in her script. She was going to cut me from her will. Said I was ungrateful, always in her shadow." Miss Marple's expression remained gentle, but her mind sharpened. "A letter, you say? Did you keep it?" Eliza nodded, producing a crumpled sheet from her pocket. The handwriting was Lavinia's, its tone cold. "Eliza, your ingratitude seals your fate. My fortune goes elsewhere." "Where was this found?" Miss Marple asked, examining the paper. "Under her makeup case," Eliza replied. "I didn't tell the police. I was afraid they'd suspect me." The letter was a clue, but Miss Marple sensed it was incomplete, like a half-told tale from the village sewing circle. She thanked Eliza and sought out Colonel Melchett, who was conferring with Inspector Slack in the library. "Any progress, Colonel?" she inquired, her tone deferential. Melchett sighed. "Slack's fixated on Reginald. Says a witness saw him arguing with Lavinia before the performance, threatening to leave her. But the evidence is circumstantial. The dagger's fingerprints are smudged, useless." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Circumstantial, yes, but consider the blackout's brevity. Seconds, not minutes. The killer needed precision, familiarity with the stage's layout." She recalled a village pantomime where a misplaced prop had caused chaos, revealing the importance of timing. "And the poison," she added, "suggests foresight, not impulse." Slack, overhearing, scoffed. "Foresight? Half the troupe had grudges. I'm hauling Reginald in for more questioning." But Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere, piecing together the mosaic. Vera's fear, Timothy's accusation, Eliza's letter, Victor's absence during the blackout. She slipped away to the stage, where the curtains hung heavy, their folds untouched since the murder. Kneeling carefully, she examined the floorboards, spotting a faint smear of wax, candle wax perhaps, from a prop not listed in the script. As noon approached, a new rumour surfaced, courtesy of Mrs. Price's tireless tongue. Lavinia had been seen arguing with Victor Lang in Danemouth weeks earlier, over money owed from a failed production. Miss Marple filed this away, recalling a similar dispute in the village over a misallocated charity fund. She also noted a stagehand's offhand remark. The prop box had been left unattended for 10 minutes during the interval, accessible to anyone with nerve. The day's revelations tightened the web, but the spider remained elusive. Miss Marple returned to the drawing room, where Dolly awaited, her eyes wide. "Jane, you've that look, like you're unravelling one of your shawls. What's afoot?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Merely threads, Dolly, but they're beginning to knot. Someone wove this crime with care, but every weaver leaves a flaw." As twilight deepened, the manor buzzed with suppressed tension. The suspects, confined to their rooms, cast long shadows of doubt. Miss Marple sat by her window, the note in her hand, its words a beacon in the dark. Whispers had pointed fingers, but the truth, she knew, lay in the silences, those fleeting moments when masks slipped. In St. Mary Mead, darkness concealed, but it also revealed, and Miss Marple was determined to draw back the final curtain. Chapter 6. The Unravelling Thread. The air at Gossington Hall grew thick with tension as the investigation into Lavinia West's murder reached its third day. The Manor's once welcoming halls now echoing with the heavy tread of suspicion. The autumn light filtered weakly through leaded windows, casting a pall over the polished oak and faded tapestries, as if the house itself held its breath. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a mere prop today, her mind weaving through the tangled threads of motive and opportunity. The anonymous note, Vera's midnight confession, Timothy's accusation, Eliza's hidden letter, and the smear of candle wax on the stage floor all formed a pattern, incomplete but tantalizingly close to resolution. She recalled a village sewing circle where a single dropped stitch had unravelled a carefully crafted lie, and she sensed a similar flaw in this deadly tapestry. Sir Henry Clithering, determined to restore order before the coroner's inquest, convened the suspects and key witnesses in the ballroom, now stripped of its theatrical trappings, save for the ominous velvet curtains. Inspector Slack, his notebook bristling with scribbled frustrations, stood at the forefront, flanked by Colonel Melchett, whose military bearing did little to mask his unease. The cast of the Velvet Shadow sat in a tense semicircle. Reginald West, his charm faded to a ghostly pallor. Eliza Croft, her locket clutched like a lifeline. Timothy Hale, his youthful bravado replaced by a nervous twitch. Vera Stanton, her efficiency a brittle shield, and Victor Lang, his urban Polish unruffled, a cigarette holder dangling with studied nonchalance. Dolly Bantry, seated beside Miss Marple, whispered, "It's like a scene from the play itself, Jane. Everyone waiting for the villain to be unmasked. But who?" Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, scanned the room. "The truth, Dolly, is like a curtain. It conceals until the moment it's drawn aside. And that moment is near." Inspector Slack cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We've evidence enough to make an arrest," he declared, his gaze fixed on Reginald. "A witness saw you with the real dagger before the second act, Mr. West, and your wife's will, favouring you unless infidelity was proven, gives a clear motive." Reginald leapt to his feet, his voice cracking. "That's absurd! I loved Lavinia despite our rows. I was in the audience when she fell," Miss Marple interjected softly, her tone as gentle as a vicar's sermon, yet carrying the weight of authority. "If I may, Inspector, the timing is key. The blackout lasted mere seconds, hardly enough for a man in the audience to reach the stage, swap daggers, and strike with precision." Slack's scowl deepened, but he held his tongue, sensing her point was not yet complete. She turned to Victor Lang, her gaze steady. "Mr. Lang, you were absent during the blackout, were you not? Passing a note, perhaps, to distract attention?" Victor's smile faltered, his cigarette holder pausing mid-air. "A note? Preposterous! I was indisposed, as I told you." Miss Marple nodded, as if conceding, but her mind noted his hesitation, much like the village grocer's stammer when caught shortchanging a customer. Next, she addressed Timothy. "Mr. Hale, your ambition is admirable, but Lavinia's criticism stung, didn't it? A debt to her, perhaps, for funding your theatrical dreams?" Timothy flushed, his hands clenching. "She belittled me, yes, but I was on stage. Everyone saw me." His protest echoed too loudly, Miss Marple thought, like the choir boy who denied breaking a window, yet clutched a slingshot. Her gaze shifted to Eliza, whose fingers twisted her locket with increasing frenzy. Miss Croft, the green ribbon by the stage door, part of your costume, I believe, and the letter you found, so conveniently hidden. You knew Lavinia's plans to disinherit you, didn't you? Eliza's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. I found it, yes, but I didn't. Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice soft but inexorable. The dagger poisoned with digitalis from Lavinia's own medication required intimate knowledge. You handled the props, had access to her dressing room, but there's more. She paused, letting the silence stretch, her eyes locking onto Eliza's. Lavinia discovered something, a betrayal perhaps. Not just ingratitude, but a liaison that threatened her pride and fortune. Reginald gasped, his face ashen. Eliza! What's she talking about? Eliza's composure shattered, her sobs erupting. It's not true, I didn't. Vera Stanton stepped forward, her voice steady but strained. I saw it, Miss Marple. Eliza tampered with the prop box during the interval. I didn't want to believe it, but I found a vial of digitalis in her bag later, hidden in a seam. The room erupted in murmurs, Slack's pencil scratching, furiously. Eliza's sobs turned to a wail. No! I only wanted her to notice me, to give me a chance. Miss Marple's voice cut through the chaos, calm as a village pond. You switched the daggers, Miss Croft, and laced the real one with poison, knowing Lavinia's heart condition would make even a shallow wound fatal. The blackout gave you seconds to act. Your maid's role placed you perfectly behind the curtains. But your motive ran deeper than the will. She turned to Reginald. You and Eliza, your whispers backstage, your shared glances. Lavinia knew of your affair, didn't she? She threatened to expose you both, leaving you penniless. Reginald staggered, his denial feeble. An affair? That's nonsense. But Eliza's cry confirmed it, her voice breaking. She was going to ruin us. I loved Reginald. She couldn't take him away. The confession hung in the air, a curtain finally drawn aside. Slack moved swiftly, signaling a constable to restrain Eliza, who collapsed weeping. As the truth spilled like blood on the stage, Miss Marple continued, her tone almost sorrowful. The note to me was a desperate ploy, Miss Croft, to shift blame to Victor, but your locket twisting, same as the prop knot in the play, betrayed your nerves, and the wax on the floor, from a candle you used to light your way in the blackout, dropped in haste. She produced the green ribbon from her handbag, its hue unmistakable. This, caught by the stage door, sealed your path. Colonel Melchett, his face grave, nodded. Astounding, Miss Marple! You've done it again. Slack, grudgingly impressed, muttered, Meddling old. Well, sharp as ever. The room buzzed as Eliza was led away, her sobs fading down the corridor. Victor Lang exhaled, his relief palpable, while Timothy sank into a chair, his dreams of stardom dimmed. Vera, her loyalty to Lavinia vindicated, wiped a tear, and Reginald stared blankly, his future unravelling. As the gathering dispersed, Sir Henry approached Miss Marple, his moustache twitching. You saw through it all, didn't you? Like one of my old yard cases, but neater. She smiled faintly. Merely observation, Sir Henry. People are like plays, full of cues if one listens. Later, in the quiet of the drawing room, Dolly Bantry pressed her friend. Jane, how did you know? It was like watching a puzzle snap together. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. The heart, Dolly, betrays itself in small ways, twisted lockets, whispered secrets. In St. Mary Mead, as on any stage, the truth always takes a bow. The manor settled into uneasy calm, the velvet curtains now mere fabric, their secrets laid bare. Yet Miss Marple knew that human nature, like a well-crafted script, would always produce another act, another shadow to unmask. For now, though, the stage was clear, and justice had its curtain call. Chapter 7. Curtain Call. The storm of suspicion that had gripped Gossington Hall for 3 days broke at last, leaving behind a fragile calm, like the quiet after a tempest in St. Mary Mead. The manor, its grandeur subdued by the shadow of murder, seemed to exhale as Eliza Croft was led away in handcuffs, her confession still echoing in the ears of those gathered. The velvet curtains, stripped of their mystique, hung limply across the makeshift stage, no longer concealing a killer, but serving as a mute reminder of the drama that had unfolded. Miss Jane Marple, seated once more in the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking with serene precision, reflected on the case's resolution. The threads, Eliza's betrayal, Reginald's complicity, the poisoned dagger, had woven a tapestry as intricate as any village intrigue, and she had unravelled it with the patience of one darning a worn sock. Outside, the autumn dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and slate. The manor's gardens hushed save for the rustle of leaves skittering across the gravel paths. Inside, the atmosphere was one of cautious relief. Sir Henry Clithering, his joviality partially restored, paced the room, his moustache quivering as he recounted the morning's denouement to Colonel Melchett. "By Jove, Miss Marple," he said, pausing by her chair, "you've outdone yourself. Scotland Yard could use a mind like yours, though I dare say you'd find their methods too rigid." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Kind of you, Sir Henry, but I prefer the village pace. People reveal themselves in small ways, over tea or in a glance. It's merely a matter of listening." Her thoughts drifted to a long-ago incident at the vicarage, where a misplaced prayer book had exposed a theft. Its simplicity a mirror to this case's subtle clues. Dolly Bantry, perched on an ottoman, leaned forward, her curiosity undimmed. "Jane, it's uncanny. How you pieced it together. The ribbon, the wax, Eliza's locket twisting. It was like watching a play reach its final act. But how did you know it was her, truly?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her expression gentle but firm. "The heart, Dolly, is a poor actor." Eliza's resentment was plain in her gestures, her voice, like the girl in our knitting circle who coveted another's pattern. Her envy turned to action when opportunity beckoned. The morning's confrontation lingered in the room like a fading echo. After Eliza's tearful admission, Inspector Slack had pounced, his usual brusqueness softened by grudging admiration for Miss Marple's insight. "You've saved me a headache, ma'am," he'd muttered, scribbling furiously as Eliza recounted her scheme. She had slipped into Lavinia's dressing room during the interval, pilfering the digitalis from her aunt's medication case, a simple act born of familiarity. The prop dagger, swapped with a real one from Reginald's collection, was coated with the poison, its application timed for the blackout's fleeting cover. "I didn't mean to kill her at first," Eliza had sobbed, "but she was going to ruin everything. Reginald, my future, the inheritance." Reginald, stunned into silence, had offered no defence, his role as Eliza's lover casting him in a new, sordid light. Victor Lang, exonerated but not unscathed, had slipped away to London, his ambitions for Lavinia's comeback dashed. Timothy Hale, his dreams of stardom tarnished, sat quietly in a corner, his bravado replaced by a chastened air. Vera Stanton, her loyalty to Lavinia vindicated, had assisted the police with quiet efficiency, her earlier reticence explained by fear of Eliza's wrath. Colonel Melchett, sipping a brandy, joined the conversation, his voice gruff but warm. "Miss Marple, you've a knack for seeing what we blunder past. That candle wax, how did you connect it?" She inclined her head, her tone modest. "A small thing, Colonel. The script called for no candles, yet the wax was fresh, dropped in haste." Eliza, as the maid, moved freely backstage, using a candle to navigate the blackout. It's the little inconsistencies you see that betray the grandest plans. As the group dispersed for luncheon, Miss Marple wandered to the ballroom, drawn once more to the stage. The velvet curtains, now parted, revealed the bare boards where Lavinia had fallen, the bloodstains scrubbed clean but indelible in memory. She knelt, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood, and spotted a tiny bead overlooked by the police, a costume pearl, likely from Eliza's maid outfit, dislodged in her frantic act. "Careless," Miss Marple murmured, slipping it into her pocket, much as she had the green ribbon days earlier. It was a habit from her village days, collecting fragments that others ignored, like the button that had solved the mystery of the stolen silver. Mrs. Price, ever the harbinger of gossip, cornered her near the stage door. "Miss Marple, they're saying in the village that Lavinia's will is being contested. Reginald's fighting for his share despite everything. And there's talk Eliza was seen with him in Danemouth last month. Cosy as you please." Miss Marple nodded, unsurprised. "People will talk, Mrs. Price, but the truth speaks louder, in time." She recalled a similar rumour about a baker's wife, which had unravelled a web of deceit when paired with a stray receipt. Dr. Haydock approached, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, his face weary but kind. "You've done a service, Miss Marple. Lavinia's heart condition made the poison lethal, but without your eye, we'd have pinned it on the wrong soul." He hesitated, then added, "There's a rumour she was planning a new play, one that would have exposed old scandals, Victor's, perhaps, or even Vera's past." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A dangerous ambition, Doctor. The stage reveals, but it also provokes." As evening fell, the manor prepared to return to normalcy. Such even, guests dispersing to their homes. Inspector Slack, packing his notes, offered Miss Marple a rare nod. "You've a devilish knack, ma'am. I'll not call it meddling again." She smiled, her expression serene. "Merely observation, Inspector. The world is full of patterns if one looks." Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple resumed her routine, her cottage a haven of quiet after the manor's tumult. Over tea with Dolly, who had insisted on a full recounting, she reflected on the case. "It's the small things, Dolly. The locket, the ribbon, the wax. Like the village girl who lied about her sweetheart. Eliza's heart betrayed her long before her words." Dolly shook her head, marvelling. "You're a marvel, Jane. St. Mary Mead's own sleuth." As night closed over the village, Miss Marple sat by her window, the familiar click of her needles a counterpoint to her thoughts. The velvet curtains of Gossington Hall had parted, revealing a tragedy scripted by human flaws, jealousy, greed, forbidden love. Yet she knew, as surely as the seasons turned, that new dramas would unfold, new secrets would lurk behind other curtains. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the stage was never truly dark, and Miss Marple would always be watching, ready to draw back the veil,